Welcome back, guys, to yet another Tip-Off Tuesday. This is the last episode before we enter the Roaring 20s era of Tip-Off Tuesday. Today, we're diving into details. Now I'm going to be showing you guys how to add details with my techniques to your piece. This will be what I like to call a good little detail sesh. Woo-wee! This is gonna be a good one. Let's go! So the goal is to show you guys what I do so that you can try it out and see how your artwork improves. Now let's get crack-a-lackin'. All right, let's do this. Here are some of the tools that we're gonna use. Just a regular pencil. My favorite Mono Zero eraser. A #1 smudger. A medium charcoal. A hard charcoal. Some powdered charcoal. And last but not least, a brush. Now, as you can see on this, I've pretty much finished this bug up with one exception, and that exception is being the last leg. So I'm going to show you guys how I do that. So first, I tend to like to start from the top to bottom, left to right, because I'm right-handed. This way I can work on any section of the piece as I come down and to the right without having to risk smearing the charcoal. Come up through the top here with the hard charcoal. Hard charcoal is the best for outlining anything because it's smooth, it tends to be sharper, glides across the paper and applies easier than, say, medium charcoals or soft charcoals. And then we're going to want to come up and establish the boundary here. Notice I'm choosing that outline that I laid out with the pencil just kind of as a guide. It's not necessarily set in stone. I always try to get the outlines out of the way because, like I said, then I know my boundaries and I can start applying charcoal from there, from the inside with my brush, with my powdered charcoal, and I'll show you guys how to do that here in a second. I love charcoal because it's just fun. It's fairly forgiving as well. If you mess up, 9 times out of 10 you can fix your mistake. The thing about hard charcoal, and one of the reasons why I only use hard charcoal for my outlines, no matter what it is that I'm outlining, is because of the way it looks. It's just very, very dark and very smooth, and the reason why that is because there's actually more binder in this pencil than there is in, say, medium or soft rated pencils. And it's because of that they tend to spread easier. Hard charcoal doesn't do that. It doesn't like to spread. There's too much binder in it. But for outlines, that's perfect. Now, if you go into the interior of this leg, like I'm going to show you here in a second, you'll see what I'm talking about. As far as how the hard charcoal doesn't necessarily like to smear, and that's why you want to use it. Got away from me. There we are. So now we have our outline. Up until this point, we've used only the hard charcoal. So now, I'm going to show you a little trick. So now I'm going to take my brush and pat it on that soft powdered charcoal that I showed you at the beginning. And this is the fun part. This is when you really start to see the manipulation of the charcoal and what it is that you're doing. It's literally this simple. Go in for a little bit more. And also, when you're looking at your reference, no matter what it is, if you have just dabbed a little bit of charcoal and it tends to be a little bit too dark, like this is here, that's okay. You can erase that. And a good best practice that I always do is if I know that there's a lot of powdered charcoal, like too much, I'll always go in and I'll dab it first on a dark spot on my piece, and then I'll apply it to where it is that I want, if it's a lighter segment of the piece like this part is here. Little tip. Here we are. Drawing should be fun. If you don't have fun doing it, then why do it? But I've always found it very, very fun. So what we're doing here is this is the initial layer. This is the very first one. So if it doesn't look quite like you want it to look like, don't worry about that. We're not there yet. Now this is fun here. Now we're gonna take our Mono Zero eraser because there's a little bit too much charcoal. Just take it real quick, just like that, boom, boom, there we are. See how easy that was? Barely had to touch it. That charcoal came right off. Erase this here, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that this initial layer, before I start layering it with medium charcoal, and then eventually to finish it off, I'll throw some hard charcoal on it. Remember what we always say, a hard charcoal will stick to a soft charcoal with this method. So keep that in mind. This leg starts off pretty dark, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a whole bunch of powdered charcoal here with my brush. Put that on there. Put it on the places where I know it's gonna be darker than others. Take our number 1 smudger. And we'll go ahead and we'll start pushing this. And this is another way that you can actually apply charcoal. You don't necessarily have to apply charcoal with a brush. You can apply it with a smudger. Just barely touch it, barely touch the paper, barely touch it. And always, always move your smudger in the direction and flow of whatever it is that you're trying to put charcoal on. So like this leg, for example, flows from left to right and at this angle. So that's the angle that I'm gonna follow as I go back and forth. Might not seem like it, but if someone's viewing your piece, subconsciously they'll pick that up and they'll recognize that that doesn't look natural. So you always want to make it look as natural as possible, especially if you're drawing animals or anything in nature. Just like that. So now I have another nice layer. Now again, even though this is technically the second layer of this portion of the leg that we're doing, we're not done. Another unique trick is you can take your brush, and much like with painting, you can actually fluff the charcoal and you can make it have a softer look. And a lot of times what will happen is with a soft or a medium rated charcoal pencil, you'll find that when you hit it with a brush like this, that charcoal will actually seep into the paper. Seep, I don't know if that's the right word, but it is now. But it'll actually seep into the paper, and you'll get a really nice, smooth application, and that's what we want. So now what we'll do, now that that soft has been laid down, we'll take a medium charcoal pencil, throw that down. So now I'm barely touching this. Barely touching this. What I'm doing is I'm just pulling out shadows within this leg. A lot of times, shadows will go on top of charcoal that you've already laid down. This is a soft charcoal that we had laid down with the brush. Now I'm putting a medium charcoal on top of that soft charcoal. The reason why I do this is because with the way the charcoal applies to this mixed media paper, you get a really soft look. And that's because the charcoal has been basically compressed all the way onto the paper. The medium is coarse enough to where it holds onto that soft charcoal, and of course the hard charcoal has more binder than both of those. And because of that fact, it gives it a nice silky finish, which is perfect for laying right on top of this medium and soft charcoal. So it's a 3-layer process, but it gives you some really nice effects. So notice how we've thrown down this medium charcoal here. Notice how it's kind of coarse, not too appealing. That's okay, don't worry about that. We'll take our number 1 smudger. We'll just go ahead and smooth it out, just like that. Boom. All of a sudden it's not so coarse, and all of a sudden it's smooth. Blend it right into the paper. Don't be afraid to push a little hard, but 9 times out of 10 you won't necessarily have to. The medium charcoal will mix perfectly with the soft charcoal underneath it. And then depending on exactly what kind of look it is that you're going for, you can do this for as long or as little as you want. But in this case, because this is a bug, typically bugs are fairly smooth unless they have like spikes and stuff on them, like this one does.
Bring this here.
A good rule of thumb to always keep in mind is that your initial layer, if you're going to try this technique out for yourself, your initial layer, the first layer, will always be a soft charcoal. And then you will apply either a brush or a smudger to that to make sure that you have a nice smooth coat. So your first layer should always be very smooth. The smoother it is, typically, the better the medium charcoal will actually stick to it. And of course, like I said, depending on what kind of texture it is that you're going for, you can play with that a little bit. See how we're playing around with that white space. You literally can make any kind of an effect you want with these tools. So see that right there? We've taken our Mono Zero eraser here, and we're just hitting it up just a little bit. I'm barely pushing, and yet I'm getting incredible effects very quickly. There we are. Just like that. And then another unique trick is if you actually take your smudger, go to the outline of the hard charcoal, push down and pull up, you'll actually get a really neat effect that actually will add dimension to whatever it is that you're drawing. And it's literally that simple. You grab it and pull. Grab it right here and pull. And if you have too much, don't worry about that. Bring in your Mono Zero eraser. Just like that. And all of a sudden this leg has some dimension that you couldn't have got any other way. Yes. With charcoal, it's all about being subtle. Sometimes the most subtle changes, even though they're not necessarily blatantly apparent at first, are what I actually appreciate when it comes to looking at charcoal art. I really enjoy seeing the details, being able to stand there for 5-10 minutes and just look at a piece for all that time and slowly but surely pick out subtleties, things that I didn't even notice looking at it at first right away. It's really cool. I like that. Okay. So up here on this joint, there's some dark spots. So what we'll do, seeing as how we have two layers, we have our soft layer and our medium layer. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our hard pencil. We're going to go in and we are going to throw down another layer. See how that darkens it up, gives it dimension. Also be careful though, because hard charcoal is extremely dark, and sometimes you can throw a little bit too much charcoal at first and get an effect that you weren't necessarily counting on. So just be aware of that. Okay, go ahead and we'll soften that up with the brush. See that? Boom. Change right before your eyes. You can go in, you can apply charcoal like this as well with the brush. I tend to, when I'm applying that initial layer, sometimes I'll go half and half, for the sake of this demonstration, I'm showing you guys both techniques, but it kind of depends on exactly what it is that you're drawing and what kind of effect you want. But I find that sometimes, say for here, in this example, there are some shadows in this leg that are fairly abrupt. And a lot of times when you have very abrupt shadows, like on insects, like this, for example, sometimes the smudger will actually work a lot better for you as far as throwing down that initial layer before you start layering on your other charcoals than say a brush would. Brushes are great, but a lot of times what you'll find the biggest problem with brushes is that you won't have a small enough brush to get the kind of effect you want in small spaces. So that's why it's always good to have a good smudger set to back you up in an instance where that might happen. Remember, an artist is only as good as his tools in many cases, because tools give you the ability to create effects that would be very, very hard to do with, say, just your finger, for example. And if realism and hyperrealism, if that's the kind of art that you wish to create, then tools will only help. All right, we'll go ahead and we'll take the smudger here, soften this up. And a lot of times what I'll do is when I think I'm done drawing a particular piece, I'll actually do one last session that I like to call my detail session. And it's the session where I go through with my hard charcoal, and typically my hard charcoal is, my hard charcoal, my brush, and my smudger are about the only tools that I use in the detail session. And I'll go through, and my erasers as well. I use those quite frequently. Just go through. Erasers are extremely powerful. It's amazing what you can do with them with this technique. Let's go through here and highlight the top of this. There we are. Take my hard charcoal. Some ends on this. There we go. Darken these up. All right, go through, darken this up just a little bit, then I'll go ahead and I'll hit this with a brush and soften it up. Make sure to use this hard charcoal. Now, if you find yourself in a spot where you need some depth, or do you really need to make something pop, just grab the hard charcoal, throw it on there. It'll apply very nicely to the soft and medium charcoals, and it'll really stand out, and it'll make whatever it is that you're trying to make stand out pop very nicely. Go in here, soften this up with a hard charcoal. You can leave that texture there too. See, if I was to hit this with a brush, I'll do it up here. See how it just kind of softens it up and it kind of disappears with everything else? If you actually just let charcoal sit like that, it'll give you a much different effect. That way you'll have some nice variance in your texture. Go in here, the smudger. Bring this up, the shadows come up here a little bit off the top of this. Pull that down. The harder you push with these smudgers, typically the smoother the charcoal will tend to look. And of course you can always hit it with the harder charcoal if you want to darken it up. But remember, you don't want to let the hard charcoal get away from you. If you want to give something a little bit more texture, a little bit rougher of a look, remember, don't hit the charcoal with a brush, just let it sit. It'll give you a completely different effect, the real rugged look. Which will be perfect. Hit this a couple more times, right like this. couple more things here. And there you are. So there you have it, guys. Those are some tips, some tricks, and some techniques that you guys can try on your next piece. And tell us how it goes. We'd love to hear how it worked for you. So that is it. That is all I got for you guys this week. And you know what's coming next. As always, if you guys like this video and you dig what we're building here at Messer Creations, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that little bell, ding, so you guys can be notified when our next video comes out. My name is Braden. You guys have just been tipped off. Hope you guys had fun, and I will see you in the next one.